Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in freshman English, and we now turn in our hymnals poetry unit number 4 to page 730, 731 and following. We are now in the poetry collection number 8, as they call it. We'll be working with 3 titles. The E Cummings offering, Maggie and Millie and Molly and May, will be the text we're dealing with now. However, before we get there, just to remind on page 730, we are working with this question, how does communication change us? And some vocabulary as well. Let's now turn to the great E Cummings. Now, all of the poets in this collection, number 8, Cummings, Shakespeare, and Robert Frost, are authors that we will see again. So put this in your notes. In your junior year, we will come back to E Cummings again in full. And if you wish to see my lectures on learnstrong.net in the junior folder, you can find more extensive comments on E Cummings. The same is also true of Robert Frost, a poet that we've already seen once in our Unit 4. And then as well, we'll be looking at a couple of offerings by Shakespeare. The first in this collection, The 7 Ages of Man, as it's often referred to. Let's talk about Cummings real quickly. He was born in Cambridge, Massachusetts. He graduated from Harvard. Both as poet and playwright, Cummings became notorious for his unconventional style. Write that down. His unconventional style, which reflects his individualistic outlook. Much of his work is playful, I would write that down, and lyrical, for sure I would write that down. And he often disregarded rules of grammar, spelling, and punctuation. And that's what makes Cummings so much fun. Now, Cummings is an important poet in room 303. During the entire time that we've been together, actually, Cummings, not to freak you out or anything, but Cummings has been watching us the entire time. No, I mean, literally, he's been watching us the entire time. That is Cummings over my shoulder there in the corner. It's a work of art that has remained in 303 for many years, made for me by one of my students, because Cummings is such an integral part of what happens in room 303. Why? Well, we just said it, but now we'll say it again at level 2B. Cummings is the poet who decided he would go his own way, following in the vein of the great Walt Whitman, who we will meet here in a while in another lecture. Following the great Walt Whitman, Cummings said, I will write poetry a completely different way. For example, go ahead and turn to page 732 and right away notice the absence of any punctuation marks. Go ahead and look at 732, Maggie and Millie and Molly and May. This is the offering in your freshman anthology we will look at. We look at a number of other Cummings texts later. Notice no capitalization. Notice, however, that we have interesting kinds of stanza developments. We haven't even looked at the poem and we're already working at level 2B, aren't we? Right? Notice as well that we've got the potentiality of some rhyme scheme. May, day, me, see, stone, alone, right? So he is going to play games at times. Word order is also sometimes going to be interesting for Cummings. Now, this one is actually one of E Cummings' more accessible, directly accessible kinds of poems. Let's go ahead now and just enjoy the poem, the playful nature of the poem. Go ahead.
Maggie and Millie and Molly and May by E Cummings. Maggie and Millie and Molly and May went down to the beach to play one day. And Maggie discovered a shell that sang so sweetly she couldn't remember her troubles. And Millie befriended a stranded star whose rays 5 languid fingers were. And Molly was chased by a horrible thing which raced sideways while blowing bubbles. And May came home with a smooth, round stone, as small as a world and as large as a lone. For whatever we lose, like a you or a me, it's always ourselves we find in the sea.
All right, let's now go back to the poem and pay attention to some of the genius. Now, much like, put this in your notes at 3A, much like the works of Emily Dickinson, and Dickinson and Cummings are often compared, You mustn't just assume that because we're looking at a silly little childlike almost poem that nothing important is going on here. As we've often said, when you look at the surface level of a text or the epidermal level of a text, you can naturally often assume, especially, dude, there's not even that many words in this thing. Obviously, much can't be said. And let's go ahead and say it out loud. It's kind of almost like a play poem, right? La-ti-da kind of poem. And yet, I'm going to make the argument there's some really sophisticated stuff going on here that we have to maybe have help seeing. For example, let's begin by just pointing out that at level 1, this is a simple poem about children, Maggie and Millie and Molly and May. 4 children who go to the beach and each discover something. In fact, in the 3rd line, the word discover is used, right? About each one of the things they discover, it does something for them. Write that down. Everything that is discovered has some kind of importance. In other words, it's not just that, for example, Maggie discovers a shell that sings, but rather it's so beautiful she can't remember her troubles anymore. Okay? So that's the first thing we want to point out. The second thing we want to point out, and we'll obviously come back to in more detail here in a second. I'm just trying to point out to you the ways in which this is a pretty sophisticated poem. Watch this. First stanza, May day. You can see I'm looking at the last words of the line, right? May day. Notice sang and. Well, if you look at the spelling of the word sang and the spelling of the word and, notice A-N is in both of those words. Do you see what I'm talking about? Sang and. The sound is similar, but it's not exact rhyme. But look at the 3rd stanza. Star, were. And that will beg the question, let's look at what Millie found. Millie befriended a stranded star. Of course, we're talking about a starfish, right? Millie befriended a stranded star whose rays 5 languid fingers. What should be the word there? Come on, think of it. What should be the word there? It shouldn't be were, it should be what? A word that rhymes with star, which should be what? Are. In other words, you would be looking for the word are here, saying, oh yeah, here comes the word are, because we're right. Instead, Cummings changes it all up on you and says, no, it's the were. Then notice we're back to it again. And Molly was chased by a horrible thing. But then the next one, and, which of course sets nicely with the last word of the 4th line. Then all of a sudden we're back to it again. Stone, alone, me, see. Let's put it in our notes at 2B. Right about the moment you think you figured out E Cummings and you're like, oh, here we go. A silly little poem about kids who go to the beach. He will play a game with you. And he will in fact say, notice the word play is actually in the 2nd line. Cummings loves to do this kind of thing, where he'll give you a little hint that we've got all kinds of interesting things going on. He's playing with you. He's saying, oh, really? You think this is just a silly little poem that you can predict everything that's happening? I'll kind of mess with your head a little bit. Now let's go through at level 1 really quickly to just see what each one of them found. Maggie finds a shell, and the shell helps her to forget all of her troubles. Millie befriends a stranded star who has these incredibly beautiful fingers. Molly is chased by a horrible thing which races sideways while blowing bubbles, right? We'll maybe qualify this as some kind of a blowfish or whatever, right? May comes home with a smooth round stone as small as a world and as large as a lone. What a great line. As small as a world and as large as a lone. What game already philosophically is Cummings playing for us? Well, he's making an observation that sometimes the objects that we discover can have remarkable significance even though they're inconsequential. A silly little rock can all of a sudden become very, very precious. Of course, if you'll think about it, in another time, in another place, a huge diamond would mean absolutely nothing. When your seniors will study a writer named Voltaire, I'm jumping to 3A now, a writer named Voltaire who writes a really important text called Candide. And at one point, Candide, this discoverer, this kid who's trying to figure out his life, he shows up at a land called El Dorado. And all of the rocks in El Dorado are gold. No, seriously, gold. Huge boulders of gold. And he's walking around and he's sticking, as soon as he gets there, he's sticking the gold in his pocket because he's like, dude, I just became a billionaire. And he's putting the gold in his pocket. And the first person he meets asks him, what are you doing? You don't understand. This is gold. I'm putting it in my pocket. And they go around the corner and the whole road is gravel and each pebble is gold. And it goes out as far as you can see. The whole place is gold. And the joke, of course, here is we give significance to shiny things. If you'll think about it, a diamond really is just a rock. That is all that it is. And yet when we give it some kind of importance, then all of a sudden it has meaning. Notice she gives this little small stone. The final stanza is, of course, however, where we're going to go at level 2A. For whatever we lose, like a you or a me, it's always ourselves we find in the sea. Now, some students have pointed out, oh, this sounds a lot like a Dr. Seuss book or a Dr. Seuss poem. The sun did not shine, it was too wet to play, so we sat in that house all that cold, cold, wet day. There's no question that playing with language is something both of those authors are doing. Let's point out, though, that the final line suggests something important. We go through our life and we lose things as we gain things. And it's always a function of finding ourselves again as we go through the process of losing things over and over again. Let's jump to 2A quickly now and talk messages, themes. Of course, one of the major ones is that our life is constructed of two things. Losing things, finding things. Remembering things, forgetting things. Can I ask this question without insult as ninth graders? What if you could actually remember everything they taught you in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade called middle school? Well, I mean, you could just immediately call it to mind. Everything, every problem you solved in math class, every equation they taught you in science class, everything they had you read in English class. What if you could call it up immediately? Would that be good or would that be bad? Some of you would argue, dude, that would be awesome because then I would be so much smarter. The counter to that is, yeah, but think about all the useless garbage they taught you in middle school. And if you actually held all of that in your memory in a waking state, it might get in the way, you know what I'm saying, of all the other stuff. A second point, sometimes the funniest thing to do is to forget something so you can remember it again. Let's go ahead and say that one again out loud. Sometimes the coolest thing in your life is to forget something so you can remember it again. Let me give you just a classic example of that. I had a freshman who heard me say that, and that afternoon he came home and he walked up to his mom. Are you ready for this? And he gave her a hug. He gave her a hug. And of course she looked at him like, honey, is everything okay? What is wrong? He goes, no, it just occurred to me, we did a stupid poem in class by a cat named E Cummings, and it just occurred to me that I haven't given you a hug for a really, really long time because now I'm all grown up and I'm supposed to be beyond hugging. So I just want to remember what it feels like to give my mom a hug. But he reported the next day, his little experiment, that there was something really cool about that hug because it occurred to him that he had spent a number of years of his life and he had forgotten what a hug felt like. He had gotten too old, you see, for hugs from his mom. He knew what it was like when he was younger, but of course once he hit middle school, dude, now you gotta be cool. You gotta say things like see you later or something like that. You don't give hugs anymore. Very fascinating. We forget things so we can remember them again. Let's jump to 2B really quickly. Obviously, this is a fun little poem. Notice again the way the games that he plays. Hey, take a look at the rhythms here. Maggie and Millie and Molly and May went down to the beach to play one day. Notice that parenthetic, to play one day. Why is the parenthetic even there at all? The parentheses in the second line. Why not just go ahead and just say the words to play one day? Well, again, the parenthetic is setting you up, if you're an astute reader of the poem, to say for E Cummings, hey, watch this. I'm going to play with you. I'm playing with you the way these guys played with the stuff they found on the beach. The rhythms, of course, turn this into a sing-songy, simple little poem, which has a profound observation at the very end, right? Again, notice, star, R. That's what the rhyme scheme should be, and instead he changes it to were. Very interesting, the games he plays. At 3A, let's ask this question. What is the song for you that teaches you the importance of letting go, of forgiving, of rediscovering, of finding the simple things in life? Remember our text we started with? My heart leaps up. Wordsworth's little ditty. My heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky. Here in this poem, it's not a rainbow. It's something you find at the beach or in the sea, right? And yet it's also the same. It's simple things. It is the simple things in life. Another 2A observation. It's the simple things in life that matter the most when you start to think about it, right? It's the little things, the simple things. Back to 3A, when you're seniors, we'll do a poem called Tintern Abbey, lines composed a few miles above Tintern Abbey by Wordsworth, the poet that we already studied, I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud. And he will call it this. He will say in our lives, little, nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and love are all that matter in our life. What's the video game that teaches you about the simple things in life are all that matter? Is that possible? Some of my students have said it is possible, there's a text for me that teaches that. Finally, at 3B, look at that final line again. For whatever we lose, like a you or a me, it's always ourselves we find in the sea. 2 questions. Where do you go to find yourself? For you, it may not be the sea. I mean, we do live in the middle of a desert, for example. We do live close to mountains, for example. Where do you go to find the things you've lost of yourself? Do you have a place that for you is kind of that special place? And finally, this question. How can you lose yourself and find yourself? How do you do that? Play this game. If you live in a house where you are cursed to have pictures on a wall from years ago, go home and look at your 5th grade school picture and see that is you. But biologists tell us that's not you. Everything about you has completely changed since your 5th grade year. Everything. All of your cells have been rejuvenated and changed. Everything about you has changed. Of course, you don't need a scientist to tell you how different you look and dude, what was up with that haircut, right? What have you lost of yourself? And what have you found of yourself? And as you go through your high school experience, there will be losing and there will be finding. Back and forth. It's an interesting tension. Well, what an interesting little poem. Sets us up for a major philosophic observation at the end, right? I hope you enjoyed. I hope you'll look at more E Cummings poetry.